happy to welcome members of the American Club of Lisbon and members from our partner organizations, the Harvard Club of Portugal, as well as CEVAL, the Confederação de Alto Minho. I'm very happy to welcome members of CEVAL for the first time, and delighted this is the first occasion of our partnership together, which we hope to develop. We are extraordinarily honored to have our speaker today, and my friend Eduardo Moradas will introduce him in a moment, but let me take this occasion to remind you, members of the American Club, that we have an event limited to the members of the club, and on the 26th of February at 6 p.m. We have a very imaginative event. It's called From Vine to Table, organized by our fellow club member, Cherie Mitchell, the founder and CEO of Immersa Global. And it entails the possibility for everyone to order 3 bottles of wine, which will be delivered to your house. And at 6 p.m. on Friday, a week from this coming Friday, we will all get together with a group Zoom call with 4 wine experts who will help us taste and understand these 3 wines. And then we will continue on for about an hour of an online meet and greet of our usual at the end of the month of the American Club. So if you're interested, please sign up for that by contacting Ann Taylor. And then we have an exciting event open to members and to our friends and colleagues, and we will open it to many people. On March 2nd, we are incredibly lucky to have Elaine Luria, who is a Democratic member of the US House of Representatives, who was elected in 2018. Remember, in the midterms of the Trump administration, there was a large number of new Democrats who were elected. She was part of that group. She is in the House of Representatives, co-chair of the Climate Change Initiative. She's also a member of the Homeland Security Committee of the House. And she's there to share in these exciting first weeks of the Biden administration. And she will talk with us about that experience. And I will have the pleasure of interviewing her. And we will focus, I think, a lot on domestic terrorism after the events of January 6th in Washington, and also on climate change. So that's going to be a very, very special event. And we are delighted that we have a member of the US Congress to attend an American Club of Lisbon event. We have 2 other events planned, one in mid-March and one in early April. We don't yet have the dates, and I will look forward to, you will be informed of that in due course. In early April, we have another top leader of the Biden administration who has agreed to attend a live talk of the American Club. So we are extremely flattered to have these people being available to us. Let me now turn to introduce my dear friend, Eduardo Moradas. Eduardo is Vice President of the American Club of Lisbon. And that, of course, is his principal occupation. And then he has, as a part-time job, he's general manager and advisor to the board of the Caixa Geral de Depósitos. I say jokingly because he is extraordinarily busy, but still has the time to be an active member of the American Club board and to be an invited professor at the Católica Lisbon School of Business and Economics. And he will have the pleasure of introducing our speaker. I turn it over to you, Eduardo.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And first of all, let me thank once again Fernando Medina for being with us. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have your presence and to hear from you and to hear your thoughts. Let me just introduce you, even if you don't need any introduction. You are a very well-known figure. I think everybody at this live talk knows you quite well, but just to remind you that you were born in Porto, you have a degree in economics from University of Porto, you have a master's degree in Economic Sociology from ISEG, and being a member of a family with strong and important political traditions, you've approached it and you had the first contact, at least public contact, with the Socialist Party in '95, when there were the so-called Estados Gerais for the new majority with António Costa as candidate for Prime Minister, now the General Secretary of the United Nations. And then you have continued to have a public life and public participation. You had the occasion since 1988 to be then to perform important roles both in and out the government. You were Secretary of State for Employment and Vocational Training. You were later on Deputy Secretary of State to the Ministry of Economy. And then you were elected as deputy in the lists of the Socialist Party for the Portuguese Parliament in 2011. And you were elected as Vice President of the Socialist Party parliamentary group. And then later on, you were invited by António Costa when he presented himself as a candidate to be Mayor of Lisbon, for you to be deputy mayor. And so you enrolled the Lisbon Municipality as vice president or vice mayor of Câmara Municipal de Lisboa. A few years after, when António Costa assumed a new role as Prime Minister of our country, he invited you to be the Mayor of Lisbon. And then later on, you have presented yourself directly to the elections, and you were elected as Mayor of Lisbon, which you are now during this period already for almost 6 years. And you will be presented probably this year again for re-election, but we will talk about that later on. So once again, thank you very much, Fernando Medina. And Fernando, if you don't mind that and please, I'm Eduardo and Patrick. Fernando, I would like, as a starting point, before starting asking you a few questions on my own, and also questions from all the friends that are participating in this live talk, I would like to hear a bit from you about your perspectives about Lisbon. Lisbon is the main city in Portugal, is a city where live many Americans, and we are here having an initiative that is led by the American Club of Lisbon. And so there are here people from many different nationalities, but many Americans are listening to this talk. And so being the main city in Portugal, it would be interesting to understand also for all those participants in this live talk, how do we see the city, the role of the city, the evolution of the city? How is the city like everybody else and those citizens in our country and in the world suffering, unfortunately, from the pandemic? And how do we envision the future of Lisbon? So if you can speak with us a little about your ideas about Lisbon, we would thank you very much. And then we will start discussing and I will continue asking you questions. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Fernando.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Eduardo. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I hope that the next meeting that we can have, it would be on a lunch, real lunch, not on a screen. But it's much better than have this meeting this way, that not talking at all. So let's do it. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think the situation, the point of departure about Lisbon, if we go to the pre-pandemic time, it was a change in the positioning of the international role of the city. Lisbon, it was the capital of it is the capital of an European country, of a southwest European country. And I think the big change in the last years, it was that Lisbon raised a lot its profile as a city much more interconnected in the global networks of cities. This is not to say that Lisbon is going to compete with other cities that much bigger than Lisbon. It's not that issue. The issue is that in a global world, the question is that if we are in or we are out the most important networks that are being established between institutions, between cities, between the globalized and modern world. And I think the big change in the last years before the pandemic, it was that Lisbon has raised very quickly its profile as a global city, much more interconnected, with much more Americans living here in Lisbon, much more French living here, much more travels of students from each other, from a country to other countries, much more participation in international networks of production, namely on services, much more interconnection about higher education institutions. So if we look at Lisbon 10 years ago, and if we look at before the pandemic, we would see a much different city, in the sense it was a much more global, much more cosmopolitan city, a city that developed much more in the quality of life, and a city that is very ancient, but in a certain way it was discovered by a lot of people that didn't know Lisbon. A lot of people that had been to Paris 15 times, that had been to London 20 times, probably they went to Barcelona 8 times, but they didn't have to come to Lisbon. And then people begin discovering Lisbon, like what they saw, like the environment, like the combination of a warm, welcome people, the ability of speaking languages, an incredible bunch of talent, young talented people, and the younger generations, they are amazing. They are very global. They traveled a lot. They know a lot. They are very integrated with their counterparts in other countries of the world, namely the US and European countries, in Asia, and I think that's the big transformation that Lisbon made in the last years. And the big issue is about what is going to be left after the pandemic, and I think that we are going to get out of this situation, sustaining the big assets that we have now. I don't think the pandemic is going to change our position, it's going to downgrade. By the contrary, I think that we are going to keep our assets as a global city intact. Obviously, we have two scenarios. One scenario is that the pandemic, during this year, we can put the pandemic behind our back. And if that's going to happen, I believe in a very strong and quick recovery from the economic side. And the other scenario is that we are facing with a rolling problem, with new variations of the virus coming and going, and the vaccines not being effective to these new ones. So one scenario is that the vaccination could be very effective, and I think it would be a recovery that could be very quick, that recovery. Another scenario that we don't know, if there is some variations of the Brazilian ones or any other of the mutations, that the vaccine is not effective, the new vaccines. So that would require a new process of developing a new vaccine. That could not take such long, as we know by technological terms, but probably would imply a general and continuous vaccination process. That would be very tough and it would take some time. But regardless of each scenario, one or two, I think the big assets of Lisbon, if anything happened during this pandemic, I think they have improved, because the ability of being an open, tolerant city, it's an asset that we are not losing. By the contrary, it's a good that is being scarce all over the world, and we keep it.
Yes, no doubt that Lisbon has changed a lot in the last few years, and very much has to do with being more cosmopolitan and having more people visiting the city and living in the city. So we have here several ways of visiting and being present in the global world. We have tourism, we have people working here, and also there are many areas of investigation. For instance, I'm thinking about Champalimaud Foundation, where a lot of scientists from the US and other countries came and are living here and working here. I'm thinking about education and universities that are able to attract foreign students. Many of them then do some research and stay here for a while. I'm thinking also about entrepreneurship and some initiatives concerning, like, for instance, Lisbon startup and others that have attracted talent from other countries. So let's suppose that pandemic does not stay too long. How would you see those different tourism, professional opportunities, entrepreneurship opportunities, education? How do you see those areas playing a role of consolidating Lisbon as an international player in the global world and in the global competition?
Thank you for the question, because I think that's precisely the main reason I'm very optimistic about the position of Lisbon, and Lisbon didn't lose any value during this process, because the points that made us a much more global and a much more cosmopolitan city, that are basically what ones that you name it, a touristic destination, an investment destination, and foreign investment destination, and researchers, students, professionals destination. Much of that has to do with our way of receiving people, about the pool of talent that we are having here from our universities, our ability of being an open place, in the sense that, for instance, what we try here to make in Lisbon is not to develop startups that we oblige them to sign contracts that they have to stay here for 10 years. It's not natural. We cannot compete with San Francisco. The question is not, we are not going to emulate San Francisco. It's stupid, sorry, the expression. Neither with London. We are not San Francisco, and London, we are not going to be, never be that. The question is that we need to be integrated in the same networks where those cities are. So it's pretty natural that some students come here and they study, they decided to open here their company. After that, if they grow, they need to raise a capital that they cannot raise it here in Portugal, but they go to San Francisco to raise it. And then they have success there. And then when they want to expand in Europe, they will expand from Portugal and from Lisbon. That's the way we think about that. So no strings attached, it has to work for the entrepreneurs and to the business community. And I think that value, we didn't lose it. And that's the issue about creating value in a modern global service economy. And I'm economist from profession, and every profession has its setbacks and its mental restraints. Many economists don't understand really how we produce value on service economy. They think it's only agricultural and industry, but it is not that. Modern economy produces, the biggest part of value is on services, and this value is produced in big cities and in metropolitan areas. They can attract, concentrate talented, and then they can export that production of services all around the world. And I think that that's the way, that's the road that Lisbon began making some years ago. And if it is in my hands, it's definitely the way that I'm going to put it forward, because that's the only way of being a successful modern capital in the world.
And we're talking about attracting people, both to live, to come here, to participate in activities here. How do we envision also the development of cultural activities, art activities? Do you think that Lisbon could be also an arts hub, a cultural hub, even knowing that it's not a too big city in international standards, but also not being too big can have some advantages? So what kind of role do you think that Lisbon could play in that specific aspects, and what kind of role also could the municipality play in developing Lisbon has a hub for arts and culture?
Well, that issue is in the cornerstone of the process. And once again, I think the strategy is not trying to emulate and not trying that we have a silver bullet of creating a big institution, a big museum or something big that by itself can represent everything. No, we have to give room to different activities of different forms of cultural manifestations from different parts of the world to happen here in Lisbon and to develop from here. I'll give you some brief examples. We cannot compete with Art Basel. We cannot compete with Arco in Madrid. But we got the chance of having Arco here in Lisbon. First time that Arco get international. Great. We didn't have a modern contemporary art exhibition and fair 5 years ago. We have it now. It began very small. It's raising. 10 years from now, if you continue to support, to sustain, last editions, a lot of people came and fly to buy pieces of art directly here in Lisbon. That didn't happen 5 years ago. If you give another example on literature, we got the opportunity of having the library of Alberto Manguel, that it was in boxes in Toronto, I think in Canada. And we said, please come here and we'll just try to use it. The library to expand a center of studies on the story on the history of literature, but at the same time to create here a cornerstone where writers from all around the world, the top writers, can come to Lisbon, to see Lisbon, to write from here, to be here, to make things here. That didn't happen 5 years ago. It is going to happen. Well, when we make the project of Praça de Espanha, for instance, there is an agreement with Gulbenkian that process is completely integrated with renovation of the Museum of Contemporary Art of Gulbenkian that is going to be renewed in a project of a famous architect of Kuma that is integrated with the project with the garden. So that is developing in the sense that we are offering more, raising the supply of cultural contemporary Portuguese art or international art that is be here. So if we are aware and if we give room to these initiatives to grow, we are going to raise the profile. I don't believe in single big bang solutions in the sense that there is one Guggenheim in Bilbao, but my dream here in Lisbon is not to create one. It's not. But I'm very proud about we get the Alberto Manguel Library. Very proud of that because that is going to make a change in the way of our positioning as a capital of literature and as a way of developing that area and to give that signal. And I think things happen naturally if we keep an open mind how the process is going to develop. And for me, it's very clear. Lisbon, if we look at our history, we were big in the past. We were only important city when we were open. If you look at pictures of Lisbon in the 16th century, in the 17th century, we see people all around the world, different origins from Arab world, from Africa, from other countries that were here. We were a trading post of the biggest, the most important trading post. Each time that we closed, we were small. And we don't have a future closed. We are too small to be big alone. So we have to be open and things happen.
And let me ask you, what do you think could be the role or has been the role already of big events like, for instance, Web Summit? That is probably the biggest event that recently was organized in Lisbon, but nevertheless, there are other important international events that have been organized here. Can you tell us, how do you see that already recent experience, and how do you see in the future if the pandemic helps and travel will be again, hopefully possible?
The Web Summit and other big events, and Web Summit there is no comparison with other ones in dimension. It is at the same time the consequence, the result of a reality that has changed. Web Summit searched for a city that was much bigger in activity and in open and more open that level. And that was what they searched. And when they came here, they came here because they just recognized what was happening. And it is really true that at that same time, they help speeding up the upgrade. And they helped a lot in opening the city, because a lot of people come here, a lot of people came here to the Web Summit, a lot of people came here to the event, to listen to the event, to see, and they stay here as a tourist, and then they probably think, why not happen here? Why not open here my company? And then after some years, when you talk about Lisbon, you are not talking about a reality that someone knows about, a fact sheet that some consultant company puts in front of a CEO of a company. You are talking about a reality that many of them, they know it. One thing that is very striking is that last time the Portuguese delegation with the Prime Minister, they went to California, and they went to Silicon Valley companies. What they were completely amazed when they were discussing about Portugal and about opportunities of investment here in Portugal is that when they talk about Portugal, and they said, yes, we know, we've been there in Web Summit. And that changed completely the conversation, because you don't have to explain it anymore. People just been here, people know. And if we have the chance of people to be here 1 month, 2 months, we reduce amazingly the costs that people perceive about going to a different country. And if we have an attitude, and I'm very strong about that, one of my previous jobs in public administration, it was on foreign investment area. And one thing that I learned very, that it was very important for me at that time, a very important lesson, is that things need to work for every part. And don't put too much strings on things. Don't put too much constraints. Those letters in contracts, you should keep your jobs by 10 years or 11 and make this and this. That's not the way the economy works. The only way of people to stay is if it works really. And we have to make it work daily, on a daily basis, and not competing with jobs that are very difficult for us to compete. We cannot compete in Lisbon. We are not going to promote ourselves as an industry employment metropolitan area. It's not going to happen. We are not there, but we are very competitive as an international service based. Yes, we are. Yes, we are very competitive, because we compare to others, and when we discuss, the most important thing is about talent, is about what do young people do, think, what do they know, what do they learn in Portuguese universities, and yes, we can compare, we can be proud of that. And when we talk to those kids, and I think I'm amazed, because the younger generation, they are much better than my generation, I have to say. I'm not a very old person, but I think the new generations of kids in their 20s, even in their 30s, they are much more international, much more global. They know much more things, and they think differently. They live much differently. They travel much more. They are much more globally connected, and that's an asset that we have. That is very. Everyone speaks English. It's like natural. When we go here to Spain, it's not the same, as everyone knows. Big countries have more that problem, because big countries that didn't need to be so international to be successful in that sense can afford themselves to be much closed. We can't, and I think that's we are very competitive on that area, and the fact that we are a very tolerant, open, and inclusive society, it's an asset in these days. I didn't think it was going to be. If you asked this question for me 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but I think being an open, tolerant city is now a very important asset for people that come all around the world, and they want peace, they want security, they want tranquility, they want to be welcomed, they don't want to be insulted, or they don't want their kids to live with fear. about something that happens, and Lisbon can provide it.
One of the worries that you have and that you have demonstrating in the past and you have talked about the future has to do with environment and sustainability. So you and your team have dedicated a lot of time in order to get Lisbon to become the green capital, European green capital. Unfortunately, I know there was a big program and the pandemic showed up exactly in the middle of that period. Nevertheless, I would like you to hear what are the main initiatives and how do you envision the future of Lisbon as being an environmental friendly and sustainable city?
Yeah, you are right in saying that the pandemic changed our plans for the year. It is true, but basically, I don't think. At the same time, I think this year strengthens the position and the argument for a sustainable city. If you look at the pandemic development, it's now very clear. There is basically no debate about that the cities and regions that were more affected by in the severity of pandemic, if you look at rates of interns in intensive care units, in interns of hospitals, you look at those places and those cities and you see places where pollution it was high. Because the weakness of respiratory systems and the weakness of personal health had a strong impact the way people could resist the pandemic. And so I think the argument about health, is now much more powerful than it was before the pandemic. And the connection between health and the connection with a clean environment, with less pollution, with less traffic, with less damage to the health of people, is now much stronger. So the pandemic, in that sense, put us more, because it's somehow contracts, because we each day we open the televisions and we follow the number of people that die each year and that are dying with COVID, and we think and we see the tragedy. But well, in Portugal, every year 6,000 people die on respiratory diseases caused directly by pollution, and a little less than half that die about COVID. And the difference is that those people don't deserve less respect and less attention from public authorities, from ourselves as a community, because those people that they and if we add to that the people that have a lack of quality of life because of pollution and health problems that we create about the environment where we live, and when we think that on that we can do something, it depends on us, because it's not something that it is a virus that we don't connect, that we don't know, a vaccine that has to be developed, a technology breakthrough that we need to make. No, about pollution, we know how to do it. It's not rocket science. It's about political will, and I think the awareness of the health and the connection of health with the life in cities, it was something that the pandemic, in a certain way, showed to people much more strikingly, and I think we can, because we talk a lot about hospitals and health facilities. But when we go to that area, we are not talking about health. We are talking about fighting a disease. When we need to talk about health, we need to talk about the quality of life. We need to talk about personal habits, the way that the social habits, the way that cities are organized, the way that how do people move in the cities, how do people eat in cities, how do people organize their lives in the cities, how do we cities organize ourselves to provide a different life to citizens. So I think our agenda, just to short my answer to you, is that we now have a responsibility of having a much stronger case that people are much more aware for listening to us, and to listen. Okay, let's see, because I don't want to have a lung problem. So what does the mayor has to say about my health? What he is going to make about it? And at the same time, I think that as many people have stressed, the pandemic didn't improve our situation in the climate change battle. And I think one of the biggest risks that I see in the recovery of the pandemic is the risk of the willing of people that want to return to business as usual very quick. And I think that's one of the biggest risks is after the pandemic, people just want to go back to the day before the pandemic, to get their life back to normal very quickly and recover the profits they lost, the capital that it was lost very quickly. And that's a big risk in the sense that we cannot return to the same society with the same problems that we have before the pandemic. We have to learn from that and to make a jump on investments of sustainable environmental sustainability is for us absolutely crucial.
Now, we have covered several topics about Lisbon, the city that you are mayor. But some of the topics that we have covered, I think, can only be addressed properly if there is a good coordination between Lisbon and the municipalities around Lisbon. So I think that we should think in terms not of just Lisbon, but of Big Lisbon, the metropolitan area that has around 3 million inhabitants. And this has to do with issues like sustainability, that depends, for instance, on transportation. This has to do with also when we have discussed a few minutes before of turning all this region attractive from an international point of view. So all this depends on good coordination between all municipalities of the metropolitan area. So to manage this area, this region as a region. I would like to hear from you if you think that things have been done properly in the last few years in this area, in this sense, and if you think that there is some room for improvement, and what suggestions would you give in order to have a proper regional management in order to be more effective in exactly many aspects that you have mentioned till now?
I think you are precisely right. That's a very important topic because the economic organization of the production, the social organization in the territory doesn't confine in administrative boundaries of municipalities. It just spreads from much bigger areas. If we look to what is, from an economic point of view, if we look what is the region of Lisbon, it's a very big region that goes from basically Leiria to Évora, Leiria in the center of the country to Évora in Alentejo, that goes even far from the metropolitan area to the Lisbon metropolitan area, although Lisbon metropolitan area, it is a good and big administrative region. But if you look to the economic reality, all of this economic activity is basically is strongly integrated. So it is impossible to solve any of the big problems that we are facing if we think inside the boundaries of a city. I cannot solve the problem of mobility if I think about Lisbon. I cannot solve the problems about housing. I cannot solve the problems about economic development. I cannot solve the problems about the attraction of foreign investment if we don't have a much more broader approach than goes to the metropolitan level, at least the metropolitan level, at least. So if we look just to our boundaries, it's impossible to solve. About mobility or about climate change, about health, what we are talking, each day before the pandemic entered Lisbon 400,000 cars. It's 2,000 kilometers of straight line of cars that each day passes from the city of Lisbon. There's no solution for that once they are inside Lisbon. Or I get a good metropolitan public heavyweight metropolitan transport system, or I cannot solve the problem. Because the cars, once they entered Lisbon, I just have two options: where I'm going to park those cars and in what street they are going to create a traffic jam. That's the only choice that I have. I don't have any more, just two. And as I cannot park 400,000 cars, I have streets that I have to choose which street is jammed. So the question has to be solved at metropolitan level. When we talk about this, we talk about housing, because one of the problems, one of the realities of the mobility of 400,000 cars entering Lisbon each day, I'm talking about before the pandemic, represents the fact that Lisbon itself lost 300,000 people in 30 years. So when we put people living much far from the business, from their employment, we create need of people to move. And if there is not any strong investment on public transport, people are going to move by car. So if I don't discuss house policy, of construction, of rents, I cannot solve the problem of Lisbon. So I cannot think, basically, as Mayor of Lisbon and as President of the Metropolitan of Lisbon, I always think in a much more regional and integrated approach, because basically the biggest problems that I have in front of this community, I cannot solve it inside my territory. So I think the last years that we saw a big improvement in the coordination between municipalities, because we defined when the last time that was, we have elections for the metropolitan area, my colleagues asked Lisbon to be presiding the metropolitan area, and I said them, I'll do that with one condition. I'll just have one subject. I'll just take care of one subject, is mobility. It's about transport systems, because we are lagging decades of lacking investment on a public transport systems. And so I'm going to invest my time in a single tariff of public transportation in old metropolitan area. And we made it something that Oyster had for decades in London or in Vienna or in other big capitals. So a very inexpensive, simplified, unique tariff system for all the public transport. We finished now the tender for a single operation on a bus system in old metropolitan area. What was the biggest tender on transport that was ever made here in Portugal, 1.1 billion euros for a 7-year contract that is going to operate in one brand that is called Carris Metropolitana. So it's going to operate in all the municipalities, a single network that is integrated with a single pass, a single tariff. And the third pass now is that we are negotiating with the government with these new funds that come from the European Recovery Fund, the investments that could help us, putting a light rail in the South Bay, to putting more investment on train and circular train here in Lisbon, to expand the subway, to expand surface trains, that we could have a much more coherent network and a much more effective network. So just to end on that, it's the cooperation has been very strong, but I have to be very clear on that. We are on the limits of our institutional model, because our model is basically a model of cooperation between municipalities. And I think that we need to go much deeper than that. And I'm a supporter of the election of the regional, the president of the metropolitan area should be an elected, directly elected official that could have a legal authority for a lot of areas. And that's a debate that's very difficult in Portugal, because as you as Portuguese know it very well, in Portugal we have the problem of people have difficulties on treating differently realities that are different. So people have difficulties in saying, no, that if there is going to be regional authorities, we should have regional authorities all around the country. I don't think so. I don't think that's the case, because here in Lisbon, all the municipalities feel that need, they want that. And for going further, we need political legitimacy that could create an authority at metropolitan level that could work better.
Fernando, your mention of the 400,000 cars leads me to one question. I've been looking at some of the questions from our attendees. From Luis Pinheiro, he said, has there been under consideration the idea that some cities have put into place of introducing some kind of toll for access to the city of Lisbon from people coming from outside?
Yes, the question, it was that issue was debated, is always on debate, is always on the table for debate. But the big question about Portugal, about Lisbon, is that if you look well, all the major entrances in the city of Lisbon, they have a toll already. They are not toll free. And the question is that we basically, if we look at those areas, basically what we don't have is an effective public transport system that really works from those areas to Lisbon. So what happened is that we lost a lot of people since the 80s, when the country saw a big development process and people wanted better houses, bigger houses, and they didn't find it in the whole neighborhoods of Lisbon. They just went outside. Same thing happened exactly in Porto, if you look at the numbers. So like a donut effect, people leaving the centering and going to the outsides of the city. So there is a difference between the region of Porto and the region of Lisbon, is that Lisbon kept the employment, the heart of the employment and the economic sector remain in the center of Lisbon. In Porto, it was much more diluted to new cities that raised around. So the question is that building an effective public transport network before that, because if you look, many of those roads are already tolled. If you go, for instance, one of the biggest that puts car inside Lisbon is the highway that comes from Cascais, and it has tolls. If you look to the north part, from Vila Franca and from Loures and from Vila Franca, it has tolls. So that's not, if you look at the people that come from the south, from the municipalities from the other side of the river, all the municipalities from Almada to Montijo, Alcochete, Barreiro, they pay tolls, and that's not it. The question is that, is there an effective transport system for people to use that really works? And we have to say basically, no, there is not. And that's what we need to put our efforts.
How quickly do you see a possible expansion of the subway system?
No, it's happening now. There was an agreement with the government to expand the system. So the first works are going to begin very quickly. We are finishing the agreement to the second expansion of the subway system. That is going to be the red line that is going to be expanded from São Sebastião da Pedreira to Campo Lida, Moreiras, then to Campo de Ourique, then to Infante Santo, Estrela, Alcântara. Then it's going to pick a light rail that is going to make the north part of Alcântara, Ajuda, Belém, and then it will enter Oeiras, picking Miraflores and Linda Velha, and going to the river. And that's the second big project that we want to sign with the government, well, in the next months. The projects are already being made, and that's the second area. And there is a third part that is the old, at the same time is going to be filled, to be finished the agreement to expand the subway system in Loures. What is very important for Lisbon, because it is going to expand to an area with a lot of people outside Lisbon, but that's the way that we prevent cars entering the city of Lisbon. And then we are making a lot of efforts. I cannot sing for victory now yet, but we are fighting a lot with the government to get approved the total package of investment that is going to be 2.3 billion in public transport system. As we told to the government that we just wanted money for one thing, one priority that we really need to solve, because there is nothing like public transport that could help at the same time three different goals. It's good for the economy, it's good for the environment, and it's good for the social integration of the communities. It's very difficult to find one policy that you say it's going to apply and to comply with different goals. And public transport system, a quality public transport system is very effective on this. It puts the economy working better because people doesn't spend so much time on transport. It is good for the environment and it's good for the integration and social cohesion of people. It's good for quality of life. It's good for public health. It's good. So there is nothing like this investment, and we are lagging behind. We lag behind for many decades on this, and we need to recover them as soon as we begin. As quick we are going to finish.
It leads me to another question by Azia Najafi. Another bottleneck before COVID was the airport, the international airport. Could you tell us a little bit about what the current thinking is in terms of investments to expand the airport, to build, as much talk has gone on, a second airport on the other side? What are your thoughts on that, and what is going to be possible on that delicate political issue?
Yes, and after you want me to give you the lottery numbers, no? The discussion of the airport is like it's a very damaging discussion here in Portugal. It's basically it's a very difficult debate, because if this debate is going on and on and on for more than 50 years. It began during dictatorship. There is a very important piece of legislation, that is amazing piece of legislation, that it was made in the 60s, that in the time of Marcelo Caetano, and where he created a group for the study of the new airport in Lisbon. And that piece of legislation is amazing because it says something like that. The airport, the traffic movements, they are rising very, very fast. So we think that in 1980, 11 years from that time, because the decree is from 1969, and it is going to reach an awkward 8 million passengers per year. Now we get 33 before the pandemic. 8 years, 8 million. The city is expanded a lot to north, and if you look at the map, a lot of neighborhoods didn't exist at that time in the city. And the airport does not have more capacity to expand, so we need to build a new one. So we create a group to study, and we create a group to build it. And 50 years from that, we now have a city, we have an airport that is 4 times bigger than the biggest value that it was predicted before the pandemic, obviously. A city that has probably more 200,000 people living in the surroundings of the airports, or in the area of the influence of the airport. And we didn't take a decision of a new one. So it's really damaging to see that process. I don't have a magic wonder to say where it's going to be built, but I can tell you what's my position about that. It's very clear on that. First of all, Portugal, Lisbon region we need a big modern airport. We are not in a position geographically and that we could spare the construction of an airport and say, no, we are going to replace it all by trains. We are not in that position. We are going to hear that speech. We are going to hear that. We don't hear those voices yet, but I have a guess, because I think I know my country, that if there was a decision of not building Montijo and going to Alcochete, 3/4 of the people that now support Alcochete's decision, once governments decided, hypothetically, that we go for Alcochete, they would say, no, we don't need any airport at all. So first of all, I think we need it. Second, we cannot Second, we need it near Lisbon. We cannot afford to have an airport that is going to decrease our ability to compete, and an airport that is 1 hour and a half from Lisbon or 2 hours and a half from Lisbon is not a competitive airport, because we are a short break city, short break tourist destination. People want effective ways of transport. So we need to have a solution that it is near. Third point is that we will not tolerate any expansion on the capacity of Portela Airport. When I began negotiating the new airport, I was mayor already in 2015. I began the discussions with the previous government in Montijo, and we said to the government of Pedro Passos Coelho, the former prime minister, and we said, okay, we agree with your proposal of building a two-way solution, Portela and Montijo. We agree on that, so let's work on that, on accessibilities, on putting the things at work. From that moment, where I held the first conversations about moving forward, and the moment before the pandemic, the airport, the traffic on the airport doubled. We passed from 15 million or 60 million to more than 32 million. So it's not the same. So I can support two solutions. I can support a solution of two-side airports. And in a two-side airport, the main side has to be Montijo, not Lisbon. Montijo is very near Lisbon. It's in the other side, it's in front on the other side. It's very easy to make the connections, quick connections here to Lisbon. So that's one solution that we can support. Another solution is a solution, if there is a solution in Alcochete, that will demand a much higher investment on creating the public weight transport system that could allow shortened time from the airport to access to the center of the city. So the only solution that we don't support, so we give room to the governments and to all the debate. I try not to be a part of the confusion. I try to be a part of the solution. The only solutions that we don't support are, one, not taking a decision. We need new infrastructure, and the way that we think, no, there is a pandemic, let's postpone the decision. It's an unacceptable mistake, because building an infrastructure like that, we are going to face this pandemic, and probably we can even face another before that it is finished. So things that are not acceptable is, one, not decide. Second is to a solution that is not competitive to the region, in the sense that is so far away, or that could be near, but doesn't have the investment in the infrastructures that are needed to connect directly to the center of the city and to the center of the metropolitan area. So that's not a solution. Third, it's not acceptable a solution that is going to expand capacity in Portugal. Because at this moment, more than 200,000 people here in Lisbon, they suffer from the noise of the airport. People say there are other cities that have airports near. It is true, but none has an airport with 30 million people movement with this capacity of lanes. And in no country that I know, they think of expanding the lane capacities in an airport inside of the city. And basically, when we go to this point of discussion, I always read again the decree that it was made in 1969, a very smart piece of legislation that every politician should read it, because it's at the same time so good in the way that they evaluate the problem, but at the same time show us what is not taking the decisions on time. 50 years from that, we are discussing the same thing.
Sad case. That's, as long as we're talking about mobility, we have one very specific question. Are there plans to add bicycle and walking lanes to the Ponte 25 de Abril? And is that likely to happen?
They are not. They are not, because the study said that they could not be. The study said they could not be put because of the wind, and those studies come from, I don't know, probably 15 years from now, to probably more than 20 years from now. And then they, at that time, it was decided to make another lane for cars. So if you look now at Ponte 25 de Abril, there is no room for any type of lanes. So unfortunately, unfortunately, we cannot have it. But one thing that we can have it, one thing that we can have it. We can have a much more effective boat transport system that is now on tender. The tender has finished already to buy 10 new boats, electric boats to make the travel from the two sides of the river. And we are pushing forward investment from the government to buy another 10 to improve the mobility that is being by boat. And then obviously in the boats, we have the ability of transport bicycles. That be absolutely essential to connect from cycling from the other side of the river to this side.
Sure, great. Coming back to the role of Lisbon, the city cosmopolitan center, how do you expect to deal with the problem that all successful cities are encountering? And the success of Lisbon has led to significant increase in real estate prices, particularly in the prime areas of the city. How do you deal with the fact that young people and older people can no longer afford to live in Lisbon and have to live elsewhere? It's not a problem that is unique, obviously, to Lisbon, but what are some of your thoughts as how to deal with it?
That reality that you are putting. It's the reality of a successful global city. Every successful global cities, they have the characteristic of having very strong real estate areas, and real estate represents an important role as an asset. So in periods of very low interest rates, we normally see a big jump on prices of the assets on real estate, very much more rigid to go down than to go up, because people, they are not houses, they are more or less banks that people put their money on that. That's a reality for a lot of cities, and for Lisbon, it's a new reality in the scale. And I think it's going to stay with us as a structural reality, because as we are more integrated in the global economy as a global capital, we are going to be the destination we are going to be in the paths of the global flux of capital. And in that sense, my prediction is that we can expect, if we are successful on attracting investment, on putting ourselves in the map, to continue as a global city, or increasingly more global city and the more international city, we need to have a structural answer to the question that you raise, is that how can we have in the same cities the price that an American from Manhattan buys and that the people from the Portuguese middle class can buy? How can we solve this equation? And the answer that we have here in Lisbon that we are putting forward is to build a public supply on public housing for young people and middle classes. I think that we need, and I think that's what made other successful cities in the past. But they made it some years before because they had these problems before. But in Portugal, we always thought that middle classes would get their needs of housing satisfied on the private market, with going to a bank, getting a loan, and buy a house. And I think for the future, that is not going to be the answer for a lot of people in the middle classes, for young people in middle classes, because they will need to have a public supply or a public regulated market, in the sense that could provide prices that people could pay. We are now building a lot of houses. We have here in Lisbon, we had a mayor, an amazing guy in the 30s, that was at the same time Minister of Public Works, Duarte Pacheco, that he bought a lot of land for the city. Other ones, I think he didn't he didn't pay much to the private owners because he paid like farms, and then he put construction rights on top of that. But construction rights went to the city, not to the private owners. But he left the city with a lot of land. And what we are using now is that land to build. We are now building a lot of houses. We are opening tender for private investors to construct and to explore those houses for 70 years, for instance, for a good investment, a very good investment for insurance companies, where a part of those houses, they are put on market at regulated prices, very low prices. The value that we are talking about is at most 1/3 of the liquid income of each family. So, and then the private investor could use another part of the houses and put it on the market at market prices. So that's the way we compensated the value of the concession. So we are making a lot of effort to build a lot of houses. And if we can get, I don't know, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 houses in Lisbon, we have now more or less 335,000 houses here in Lisbon. If we can add 20,000 houses at regulated prices for young people and middle classes, we can make the difference, and we can sustain what is going to be the other part of the house market that is much more dynamic, much more upward in the cycle, and much more integrated internationally. And I think those realities have to live together, are going to live together in the next years.
Interesting. Do you think you can do anything, this is a question from Rui Caroso, to reduce the time to get licenses, this cumbersome process that is criticized, certainly not only in Lisbon, throughout Portugal, this very cumbersome, long and difficult process to get construction licenses?
Yeah, the first thing is that I'm very, very aware of the problem, and I'm very aware that we need to solve that problem because it creates huge constraints to an investment. It changes completely the way that people can make their projections about investments, and it's very damaging for the investment community if we don't have things working properly. I have to say one thing in the support of the city authority is one thing. When I arrived here as city as a deputy mayor for António Costa, I arrived in October 2013. And we closed the year of 2013, the total amount of the licenses that we approved in that year of new construction, of rebuilding, of rebuildings, big things, small things, medium things, the total amount of licensing was 100 million euros. In 2018, we closed that year with 1 billion euros of licensing approved, 10 times more. In that period, I lost 1/3 of the team. And that team was lost basically by private investors that came to the city, and they hired my best architects, my best engineering. So they want to make the projects to the private sector, and then they created a problem in the sense, well, now the city is not answering with the same speed. Well, 2017, it was bad. It was the year where the number of projects that entered the city, it was higher than the number of projects that we approved. 2018, it was very bad. 2019, even worse. So we create a backlog of huge problems. And now the situation is improving it's improving fast. Namely, on small projects, individual projects, we approved now this year of last year of 2020, it was the year where the city approved more licenses since we have statistics, and we are making an effort on big projects, but it is not easy. It is not easy to deal with the reality that changed so dramatically in such period in 5 years. It's not easy because we don't have the ability of hiring people from one day to another. We have a lot of public regulations that we need to attend. We don't have the ability of paying people what the market is paying, because on public administration we are restricted to the salaries that are not high for these types of positions during an expansion period. During crisis, they are okay, but in expansion, each private investor pays those salaries easily. So it is not easy to make that, but we are improving. And the basic message that I want to give here is that I'm really aware of the problem. I'm on the top of the problem. We are acting on the problem. And I think that investors are going to begin seeing the differences of what's happening, but I have to ask for some patience and for some time, in the sense that these transformations about improving the situation, we had the pandemic in the middle. So we are making this transformation with all our teams working digitally from home. And it increased difficulties about managing, but I'm really aware about the situation and how to address it.
So, Fernando, we are running out of time, as you see. This is an election year for you and all of the mayors of Portugal. If you could maybe just to close before I thank you profusely for your wonderful talk. If you're re-elected, what is your vision of what Lisbon will be at the end of your next term?
That's a very smart way of outputting the question, but sorry, it's not to be impolite about the American club, not to make here the announcement of running again. So we'll have the opportunities of talking about that when the elections come. I think there is a good tradition of...
Tell me what's your vision, not necessarily related to...
No, I think the vision about the future is that we are going to face the reality that we are going to face this next year is that we are going to face a very, very damaged economic system in many areas. We are going to have a much more unequal society. This crisis is eating completely different sectors in the society. And I think that we are going to face an international environment politically that is internationally and nationally much more polarized than it was some years ago. So the big challenge is how to, at the same time, if we get rid of the pandemic in this year, if the vaccines really work for all the types of virus that is happening, I think that recovery is going to can be very strong and very quick, much quick, because we are having a compressed demand that is not strategically, it's not a will and it's not determined by the monetary conditions, it's not determined by the budgetary conditions, it's determined by sanitary obligations. Even and I think psychology of ending the pandemic could be very powerful on the growing of the economy. So, but I think the main challenge is that how we keep the city with a stronger economy, with the greener and sustainable projects, and a much more socially strong network inside the city in a time where a lot of forces are going to push us in different directions. There is the forces of business as usual that is going to be very strong and very damaging. I think Lisbon, we cannot go back to the time of mass tourism that we had before. We cannot go on that direction. There is going to a lot of pressure of returning of cars. I think we cannot return to the car use that we have before the pandemic. And I think that we have to have a strong answer put in place about housing prices, because people need to have the hope and the solutions inside the city to live here and to make their future here. Because if we don't give a future, if a city, it is constructed and it is perceived and construction only for the ones that have a lot of money, we are not really a city. We are a part of a city, but we are not really a city able to provide opportunities and dreams for everyone to fulfill here in the city. And that's the idea of a city, is a place where we can build our future, and we need to have that in our mind.
Thank you so much, Fernando. It's been
thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you so much for such an interesting, informative, and frank and and personal vision that you've shared with us. And we wish you luck in managing these very difficult times, and hope, like you, that once we come out of the COVID quickly and can all enjoy the pleasures of Lisbon that we've always used to have. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Live talk.
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.